Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie The Woman in the Yard, 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins with a gate left ajar. A wooden creak in the night. A silhouette just beyond the porch light, standing impossibly still among the grass grown high and wild. The yard is quiet, but it feels like it's listening. And the woman? She's watching. The Woman in the Yard isn't a horror film in the traditional sense. It doesn't sprint out of the shadows with fangs bared and screams echoing down empty hallways. Instead, it steps into your home quietly. It sits with you. It watches with you. It waits until you let your guard down and then, without warning, it turns your reality inside out. What starts as a slow, unnerving domestic mystery unravels into something far more disturbing, a psychological spiral about memory, grief, and the things we choose not to see in the places we think we're safest. Directed by Jada Cole, a rising auteur known for her minimalistic dread and evocative framing, The Woman in the Yard feels like the natural evolution of elevated psychological horror. With its haunting imagery and an atmosphere thick enough to touch, the film wraps its narrative in emotional complexity rather than jump scares. Cole doesn't want to terrify you with ghosts. She wants to terrify you with recognition, that split-second flash when the strange becomes familiar and the familiar becomes monstrous. The story follows Mara Bell, played with aching restraint by Kerry Washington, in one of her most layered performances to date. Mara is a woman trying to rebuild her life after a traumatic breakdown, and she's chosen to do so far from the city, in a small rental house in a quiet, sun-drenched suburb with hedges tall enough to keep the world out. She keeps her head down, drinks tea at the same hour each day, waters the flowers even when it rains. She's healing, or trying to. But something isn't right. She notices it first in passing. A shape in the corner of her eye. A shadow that seems to stretch just a bit too long. But when she turns, there's nothing there. And then one morning, she sees her. Standing in the middle of the backyard, facing the house. Not moving. Not speaking. Just watching. The woman in the yard wears white. Her hands hang at her sides. Her face is obscured by a veil, or maybe it's just the light. Mara calls the police. They find no one. Her neighbors claim not to have seen anything. "You've been under a lot of stress," one of them says gently. "Sometimes our eyes play tricks when our minds are tired." But the woman keeps appearing. Not every night. Not always in the same place. Sometimes at the edge of the property. Sometimes standing by the back door. Sometimes seated in a chair Mara never placed there. Always silent. Always still. What makes the film so chilling is its refusal to confirm Mara's fear. Is the woman real? Is she a hallucination? Is she something in between, a figure shaped by trauma, a reflection of guilt, a warning? The Woman in the Yard plays with perception like a cat plays with a string. It builds doubt not just in Mara's mind, but in yours. And that's where it gets dangerous. Mara's therapist, Dr. Green, advises grounding exercises. Describe the room. Feel the carpet. Listen for sounds you know are real. But the more Mara focuses on her surroundings, the more wrong they feel. Doors lock themselves. Her phone resets at midnight. The houseplants begin to wilt, even though she waters them every day. And always, when she peers through the curtains, the woman is there. Her past begins to creep in, fractured memories of a sister who vanished, of a night that no one ever talked about. And the film begins to show us that this isn't just about a woman watching from a yard. It's about something Mara saw, once, when she was young. Something she shouldn't have. Something buried deep. There's a chilling twist midway through the film when Mara discovers an old photo wedged behind the bathroom mirror. It's a picture of the backyard, taken decades ago. In it, there's a girl who looks exactly like her standing by the porch, and in the far corner of the photo, nearly invisible, is the same figure. The woman in white. Veiled. Watching. It's not a recent haunting. It's a repetition. And as the story tightens, Mara's sense of time begins to fracture. She wakes in places she doesn't remember going to. The layout of the house subtly shifts. She speaks to people who later claim they never had the conversation. And the woman grows closer. With each appearance, she's a little nearer. One step at a time. Cole's direction masterfully blends psychological deterioration with supernatural ambiguity. Every scene is constructed like a painting. Sharp angles, oppressive symmetry, a color palette that starts warm and slowly bleeds into colder, grayer hues. The cinematography traps you inside Mara's perspective, even when that perspective begins to fail her. You start to question what's real, not because of what you're shown, but because of what you feel. The dread is visceral, almost physical. The supporting cast deepens the unease. There's the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Linton, who bakes too many pies and insists her daughter still lives with her, even though her house is always empty. There's the mailman who refuses to walk up Mara's path and instead tosses her mail from the curb. And then there's the landlord, a man who smiles too wide and asks too few questions. "The house likes to be quiet," he says. "Don't make too much noise after dark." The film escalates not with loud moments, but with accumulation. The woman never speaks. She never moves on camera. But her presence swells, growing heavier with each scene. By the third act, she's no longer confined to the yard. Mara hears footsteps upstairs. The back door unlocks itself. And the final reveal, when Mara finally confronts the truth about her sister, about the night they buried something behind the hedge, about what she forgot to forget, hits with the force of a scream that's been waiting 30 years to escape. Without giving away the ending, it's safe to say that The Woman in the Yard doesn't rely on spectacle to make its mark. It relies on truth. And when that truth comes, it doesn't comfort. It doesn't explain. It devours. There's a reason audiences have come out of theaters shaken, not just scared. Because the film doesn't just ask, "What's out there?" It asks something far more dangerous. What did you leave behind? What happens when the thing you tried to forget comes back, not to punish, but to remind? And what if the woman in the yard isn't a ghost? What if she's you? Watching, waiting, wondering when you'll finally remember. It starts with sunlight and silence. Mara Bell arrives at the house just after noon, her car coated in highway dust, her hands stiff from hours gripping the steering wheel. The moving truck is late, but she doesn't mind. The house waits quietly at the end of a cul-de-sac, nestled between hedges so tall they seem more like walls than foliage. It's modest, weather-worn, and empty. The kind of place where a person might come to disappear. She steps inside and breathes it in. Dust, old wood, the faint trace of lavender that clings to the floorboards like memory. She moves slowly, one room at a time, her heels clicking across tile and hardwood. The kitchen window looks out onto the yard. It's overgrown. Weeds tangled in the flower beds. A broken swing set rusting in the far corner. But it's peaceful, safe, quiet. Mara is rebuilding. That's what her therapist called it. After the hospital. After the breakdown. After the things she won't talk about. Space, they said. Routine. And so, she's here. A new town, a quiet neighborhood, and a house that has been empty for years. No internet. No photos on the walls. Just her, a kettle, a stack of books, and the occasional voicemail from Dr. Green reminding her to stay grounded. The first few days pass like a soft blur. Morning walks around the block. Tea on the back steps. Watching the sunlight move across the living room carpet. She waters the plants the landlord left behind. She hums old songs without realizing it. She doesn't notice the gate the first time it creaks open. Doesn't notice the figure until it's almost dusk. She's standing in the yard, far enough away to be mistaken for a shadow, but too still, too deliberate. A woman, dressed in pale fabric, hair loose or maybe veiled. Mara can't quite tell. The face is in shadow, the body motionless, arms at her sides, not moving, not speaking. Mara blinks. She's gone. She tells herself it was nothing. The light playing tricks. A neighbor. A memory. But that night she dreams of a figure in the window, standing not in the yard, but inside the house, watching her sleep. She doesn't sleep well after that. On the 5th day, the moving truck finally arrives. Boxes are stacked in corners. Furniture assembled with silent frustration. She sets up her desk near the window that looks out into the backyard. She tries to read, tries to write, but she keeps glancing up, eyes drawn to that same spot, the place where the woman stood. And that's when the phone rings. It's Dr. Green, checking in. Mara hesitates, then tells her about the woman. Not in detail, just the basics. A figure, a shadow, maybe a trick of the light. It's natural, Dr. Green says gently. The mind protects itself by filling in blanks. You're adjusting to solitude. Stay grounded. Mara nods, says she understands. But that night, the back door is unlocked. She knows she locked it. Remembers the feel of the key, the sound of the latch. But it's open. Just slightly. As if someone tested it. As if someone came in. She installs new locks the next morning. Buys motion lights. Sets them up around the yard. And for a time, things settle. She finds a rhythm. Morning coffee, afternoon walks, soft jazz in the evenings. She avoids the neighbors, keeps her conversations short, polite. But one woman, Mrs. Linton, insists on bringing over a pie. She lived here, you know, Linton says, placing the dish on the counter. Before you. The woman. Quiet thing. Always in the yard. Never said much. Mara stiffens. The landlord told me it was empty for years. Oh, it was. Just not always. She laughs softly and leaves without explanation. Mara doesn't eat the pie. The next evening, the lights go off. Not just one. All of them. The house plunges into darkness, even though the power inside still hums. Refrigerator, stove, the faint buzz of the ceiling fan. Only the outside is dark. She opens the curtain and looks into the yard. She's there again. Closer. The same stillness. The same silence. But now Mara sees more. Her feet are bare. Her dress torn at the hem. And this time, Mara doesn't blink. She watches. The woman doesn't move. She just waits. Mara calls the police. They arrive 20 minutes later, blue lights flashing, boots in the grass. They search the yard, the alley, the surrounding street. They find nothing. No footprints. No disturbed grass. No signs anyone was there at all. Maybe it was a kid, the officer suggests. Playing a prank. Mara doesn't answer. She watches the grass. Watches the corner where the woman stood. That night, she dreams of laughter. Girls' laughter. High-pitched, echoing across the yard. A game. Hide and seek. Then silence. And a scream. She wakes with blood in her mouth. She's bitten her cheek in her sleep. She begins to unravel. Slowly. She writes less. Forgets to water the plants. Forgets to eat. The mail piles up. The kettle screams on the stove until it runs dry. She begins to see things not just outside, but inside. A flash of white in the mirror. A reflection in the window that doesn't match her movements. She finds scratches beneath the wallpaper in the hallway. Words etched into wood. She knows. The neighbors won't talk to her anymore. When she asks about the woman who lived there before, they turn away. One man mumbles something. She had a sister, didn't she? Or maybe I'm thinking of someone else. Mara goes to the library, digs through old records, finds nothing under the house's address, nothing under her name. But she finds an old newspaper clipping, faded, nearly illegible. Local girl missing after storm. Last seen in backyard. The date is scratched out, the date is scratched out. But the photo shows the house. And in the background, almost out of frame, is the same silhouette. Mara returns home and finds the backyard chair has been moved. Now it faces the house. The woman is in the yard again that night. Closer still. Just outside the window now. Hands raised to the glass. And for the first time, Mara doesn't call anyone. She opens the door. And steps outside. The air outside is colder than Mara expects. Still. Too still. She walks barefoot across the porch, feeling the damp wood beneath her feet, her breath caught somewhere in her throat. The yard stretches in front of her like a stage in waiting, every blade of grass standing alert, every shadow leaning in. And the woman. The woman stands where the grass meets the trees, her white dress unmoving in the breeze that doesn't come. Mara stops just a few feet from the edge of the porch, unwilling to cross into the yard itself. The two women stare at each other in silence. Or rather, Mara stares. The woman's face is still hidden, either by veil, shadow, or something stranger. But she feels seen. There's a pressure behind her eyes, a weight settling on her chest. A knowing. And then the woman vanishes. Not with a scream. Not with a flicker. Just gone. Mara stands there for a long time. Listening. Waiting. Trying to understand what part of her this figure belongs to. Because now it's clear, the woman isn't just a ghost. She's a wound. The next morning, Mara wakes with dirt under her fingernails. Her bed sheets are damp. Her shoes are by the door, but one is missing. She opens the back door slowly and finds muddy footprints across the kitchen floor. Too small to be hers. Too clean to be recent. She begins to spiral. Not in the cinematic way people imagine mental collapse, but in quiet, unsettling stumbles. She forgets what day it is. She finds her tea still steeping from the night before. She turns on the faucet and blood-colored water rushes out for half a second before running clear. When she blinks, she sees her reflection in windows where no glass remains. Dr. Green's voice messages become more concerned. "You need to come back," she says. "This is not the kind of solitude we talked about. This is something else." But Mara doesn't respond. She can't. Because now, her memories are starting to crack open. She remembers a night when she was young, running barefoot through the backyard, her sister close behind. Laughter. Then a sharp stop. A breath held. A scream swallowed. Something happened beneath the tree that no longer grows there. Something Mara was told not to remember. Something someone else was blamed for. She begins to dig. Literally. At night, with a flashlight and her bare hands, she starts pulling up earth near the back fence. There's a spot that feels wrong. Too flat, too quiet. And as she unearths the dirt, she finds pieces. A child's shoe. A doll's broken face. And beneath it all, a scrap of fabric. White. Torn at the hem. The same hem the woman in the yard wears. That night, the dreams change. They're clearer now. She sees her sister, young, bright-eyed, terrified, standing at the edge of the yard, pointing toward the trees. She mouths something over and over. Mara leans in. "You left me." And suddenly it all clicks. The woman in the yard isn't a stranger. She never was. She's a memory. A reckoning. A shape Mara pushed down so deep, it came back wearing the only form it could. Not a ghost. Not a demon. But a version of her sister, a version that remembers everything Mara tried to forget. The climax comes not with violence, but with surrender. Mara opens every door and every window in the house. She walks barefoot through every room. She calls her sister's name out loud for the first time in decades. And then, in the quietest moment of the film, she steps into the yard and says, "I'm ready." The woman appears, not across the lawn, but behind her. And this time, she moves. She reaches out, slow and deliberate, and touches Mara's shoulder. And with that touch, the yard changes. The grass wilts. The trees grow thin. The air thickens with grief long held. The world folds inward. And the truth floods in. Mara didn't just witness something. She was part of it. A game gone wrong. A fall. A scream. And a choice, to lie. To pretend it never happened. To let someone else take the blame. Her sister, vanished. Her guilt, buried. The woman in the yard was the part of her that remembered. In the final moments, Mara sits in the center of the yard, the grass flattened around her. She breathes slowly, deliberately. The camera pulls back, not fast, not showy, just steady, as if leaving her in the truth she's finally accepted. There's no jump scare, no cut to black, just the sound of wind moving through the leaves, and a faint echo of laughter, once lost, now found. Mara Bell doesn't scream. She doesn't run down hallways clutching her chest or flip light switches on and off while panting into the darkness. She doesn't call friends for help. She doesn't even raise her voice. That's what makes her dangerous. That's what makes her real. Mara is not your typical horror protagonist, and The Woman in the Yard is not a story about bravery in the face of monsters. It's about confrontation with memory. And Mara, quiet and trembling and frayed at the edges, stands at the center of that reckoning like a woman carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She arrives in the story like fog, silently, slowly, and with something hidden in her wake. When we first meet her, she's stepping out of a car, eyes guarded, movements calculated, as if afraid to leave even a fingerprint on the world around her. There's a stillness to her that at first seems like composure. But it's not. It's grief. It's something buried so deep it has turned into posture. Her smile is soft and tired. Her voice never climbs. She is, as one neighbor puts it, the kind of person who vanishes without making a sound. That's the point. Mara is trying not to be seen. She chooses a house with no history, at least, none on paper. A place where the hedges are high and the windows are narrow. A place where the past can't find her. But we know it will. Because characters like Mara don't get to hide for long. As the film unfolds, what makes Mara so deeply compelling is not just what she does, it's what she refuses to do. She doesn't seek out the woman in the yard. She avoids her. She explains her away. She shrinks inward. Not because she's weak, but because she knows exactly what fear tastes like. This isn't her first encounter with dread. It's her return to it throughout the first half of the film. Her character becomes a portrait of internal collapse. Her days are structured. Tea at 9, walks at 11, reading by 2. Her routines aren't habits. They're anchors. Tools to hold her in place so she doesn't slip through the cracks of her own mind. But the cracks are already there. You can hear them in the way she speaks, how her voice trails off at the end of sentences, how she loses time, how she pauses in doorways like something on the other side might be different from when she left it. And yet, we never stop rooting for her. Kerry Washington's performance imbues Mara with this incredible duality, fragility and steel in the same breath. She doesn't beg for sympathy. She doesn't perform her pain. She just carries it. The way she looks out the kitchen window. The way she brushes dust from a table she hasn't used. The way her hand hovers over the phone when Dr. Green calls, Not because she doesn't want help, but because she already knows what's coming. She knows the woman in the yard is not new. She's remembered her before. But it's not just Mara who makes this story breathe. Dr. Green, heard only through voicemail and voiceover for much of the film, is more than just a therapist. She's a tether. A voice that echoes reason in a world that no longer runs on logic. Her tone is calm but not cold. She speaks like someone trying to guide a person out of a dream without waking them too suddenly. Through her, we see the contrast, what Mara says versus what she feels. And in that contrast, we begin to understand the layers of denial Mara has built around herself. Then there's Mrs. Linton, the neighbor who seems too eager, too present, too tuned in. She bakes pies Mara doesn't ask for. She offers information that sounds more like warnings dressed as small talk. She mentions the previous tenant with a little too much precision, like someone who's told the story before but still doesn't understand it. Mrs. Linton is that character in every ghost story who knows something, but is afraid to admit how much. And it's not because she's hiding a crime. It's because she's trying not to remember her own part in the forgetting. Her role might seem small, but it's essential. She represents the community Mara escaped from, the kind of people who never ask the right questions because the answers are too heavy. The landlord is another shadowy figure. His presence is brief, but unsettling. He offers Mara a key with too much calm. His instructions are vague. The house likes quiet, he says. Try not to disturb it. He never asks why she chose the house. Never offers much about its past. But the way he speaks, the way he avoids eye contact, the way he disappears the moment the lease is signed, it all suggests he knows. Not what's in the yard, maybe, but that something lives there. Something the house is made of. Then there's Naomi. Her name is barely mentioned. She doesn't appear in flashbacks. She isn't spoken of directly. But we feel her in the pauses. In the way Mara flinches at the sight of a little girl's shoes, or how she stares too long at a swing set in the yard. Naomi is the absence around which Mara's entire existence is shaped. A sister. A memory. A secret. And eventually, we learn, Naomi isn't gone because she moved away. She's gone because Mara left her. Not physically. Emotionally. The woman in the yard, silent, pale, unmoving, is the shape of that abandonment. But here's where the film does something devastating. The woman isn't a monster. She never moves, never threatens, never speaks. And yet she is terrifying, because she sees. And what she sees is Mara, not as the woman she pretends to be, but as the child who ran. The sister who stayed quiet. The witness who chose forgetting over truth. She's not a villain. She's the consequence. And Mara? Mara is the reckoner. Her arc is not about discovering what happened. It's about owning what she already knew. And when that moment finally comes, when she steps into the yard barefoot, shaking, exhausted, and says, "I'm ready," it's not a scene of empowerment in the Hollywood sense. It's a moment of surrender, of truth, of finally looking the past in the face and saying, "I see you too." Because the woman in the yard is not just Naomi. She's all of it. She's guilt. She's memory. She's the part of Mara that never grew up, that stayed frozen at the edge of the yard, watching, remembering, unable to speak. And in finally walking toward her, Mara becomes whole again. Not healed, not free, but whole. And that, perhaps, is the most honest thing the film does. It refuses redemption as a clean arc. There's no final battle, no exorcism, no closing door that locks the ghost away. There is only truth. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that watches. In the end, Maribel is not a survivor in the traditional horror sense. She's not the final girl. She's the only girl. The only one willing to stop running. The only one who stays when the shadow appears. She doesn't destroy the past. She lets it in. And that's what makes her unforgettable. The making of The Woman in the Yard was never supposed to be strange. That's what makes it all the more haunting. On paper, it was a modest psychological horror film. A small cast, a quiet location, a tight 28-day shoot schedule. The budget was just over $6 million, and there were no sprawling sets or elaborate effects. Just a house, a yard, and a woman. That was the plan. But from the moment the first camera rolled, something about the production whispered that this story didn't want to stay inside the script. It began, oddly enough, with the house. The location scout found it by accident, an old rental property on the outskirts of Wilmington, North Carolina. It wasn't listed. No photos online. Just a for sale sign knocked crooked in the wind and a mailbox that hadn't been checked in years. According to the crew, the house looked exactly like the one written into the script. Right down to the creaky back gate, the broken swing set tangled in weeds, and the way the afternoon light slanted just right through the kitchen window. It wasn't just perfect. It was uncanny. Lena Rowe, the film's director, called it a house that remembered something. She later said, "We didn't pick the location. It picked us." When they signed the lease, the real estate agent reportedly refused to step inside. She handed over the keys on the porch and said, "You'll want to keep the back door locked at night." Everyone laughed at the time. They wouldn't be laughing for long. One of the earliest weird incidents involved the prop crew. In a scene that required weathered children's toys to be scattered in the yard, they sourced a box of vintage dolls and trinkets from a local antique store. A week later, someone noticed one of the dolls had moved. Then again the next day. The crew chalked it up to wind, animals, maybe a forgetful set decorator. Until they reviewed the overnight security footage. At 3:12 a.m., the doll, set in the swing, was upright. At 3:14 a.m., it was on the ground, facing the house. No wind. No animals. No explanation. They removed the doll from the chute. The next morning, it was found on the director's chair. No one claimed responsibility. Then there was the issue with the windows. The house was old, yes. But something about the back windows didn't sit right. They fogged up from the outside, even on warm days. Condensation would form in circular patterns, as if someone had pressed their face against the glass. One of the grips, Zoe, reportedly quit after seeing a handprint appear on the pane while she was standing next to it, on the inside of a locked room. "It wasn't the print that scared me," she said. "It was the size. It was smaller than a child's. Too small." Still, production pushed forward. Rowe didn't allow panic. She encouraged immersion. She told her cast to lean into the atmosphere, to let the silence guide their performances. And the results showed. Kerry Washington, who played Mara Bell, delivered what many critics now consider the best performance of her career, and she did it with a kind of eerie calm. But even Washington wasn't immune to the strangeness. Midway through the shoot, she began waking up with bruises, small, finger-shaped marks on her arms and thighs. At first, she thought she was bumping into furniture on set. But when she wrapped for the day and slept at a hotel an hour away, they kept appearing. She wore long sleeves for the rest of the shoot. When asked about it during the press tour, she laughed nervously and said, "Method acting, I guess. Or maybe the house wasn't ready to let go." One of the most unsettling events happened during a scene that was never meant to make the final cut. It was a rehearsal. Just Carrie, standing in the yard, reciting a line from the third act, "I'm ready." The camera was rolling, but it was a scratch take, meant for blocking. Later that evening, editor Mark Silva reviewed the footage. Frame by frame. Everything was fine, until the last second. Just as Carrie finishes the line and lowers her gaze, a figure appears behind her. White. Blurred. Not part of the crew. Not part of the set. It crosses from left to right in less than 2 seconds and disappears behind the hedges. They checked every angle, every roll of footage from every camera that day. The figure appeared only once. The raw footage was shown to the cast. No one had an explanation. They used the take. Another bizarre occurrence revolved around the film's original score. Composer Allain had begun work on the project months before filming began. She was known for her ambient, melancholic style and had already completed several piano-based compositions that Rowe loved. But when Ivy visited the set during week 2 of filming, everything changed. "I stepped into the house," Ivy said in an interview, "and I felt this pressure in my chest, like someone was standing on it. I couldn't breathe. I left after 5 minutes. But when I got home, I started writing differently." She scrapped all her previous work and began composing using field recordings captured on set: wind, birdsong, the sound of floorboards groaning. She layered these with reversed piano, detuned strings, and whispering. Literal whispering. When asked whose voice she used, she said, "I never recorded any whispering. That wasn't me." She didn't remove it. The final score contains at least 4 moments where a soft female voice can be heard murmuring beneath the music. No lyrics, just breath. Even the film's most iconic visual, a long, lingering shot of the woman in the yard, wasn't planned. It was a pickup shot. The production had wrapped for the day. Cameras were being packed. But Lena Rowe, standing at the edge of the yard, saw something in the light. She asked for one last take. Carrie wasn't even in costume. She threw on the white dress, barefoot, and walked to the middle of the grass. The camera rolled. What they captured was accidental perfection. The clouds shifted. The wind stopped. The trees bent slightly inward, like an audience. And Carrie, her face blurred, her arms at her sides, stood in complete stillness as the sun dipped just behind her shoulder. The lens flared in a way that formed a halo. They used the shot in the final act of the film. It was never color-corrected. It never needed to be. Other strange trivia followed the film long after the cameras stopped. The house used for shooting has since been torn down. Demolished less than 6 months after production ended. No formal reason given. The demolition company reportedly lost 2 workers during prep, neither injured, just gone. They quit the job, didn't return calls, never submitted invoices. The final day of editing was interrupted by a power outage that only affected the editing bay. Nothing else in the building lost power. When it returned, the project file had been renamed "She Is Still Here MOV." No one admitted to changing it. Marketing for the film leaned into the unsettling production rumors. Trailers whispered instead of shouted. Posters were printed with invisible ink that revealed hidden text under heat. Advanced screenings required audience members to sign a waiver, just for atmosphere, of course. And yet, none of the publicity stunts matched the real stories the cast shared during the press tour. Kerry Washington kept her prop diary from the film. She said she found entries she didn't remember writing. Lena Rowe refused to revisit the raw footage after editing wrapped. "We got what we needed," she said. "And that's enough." And perhaps the strangest fact of all? The script for The Woman in the Yard wasn't written all at once. It came to Rowe in fragments. Over 5 years. In dreams. In moments she called borrowed. She once claimed she found a line from the final monologue scribbled inside a used book she'd bought at a thrift shop, handwritten in unfamiliar cursive. The line? "She's not waiting. She's remembering." The same words whispered by the woman in the final scene. A coincidence? Maybe. But everyone who worked on the film agrees, The Woman in the Yard was more than just a movie. It was an invitation. A haunting. And for those who stood in that yard, even for a moment, something of it stayed behind. Some films ask to be watched. Others demand to be felt. The Woman in the Yard does neither. It waits. Silently. Patiently. It doesn't call attention to itself, doesn't scream its intentions, doesn't beg you to love or hate it. Instead, it sits at the edge of your awareness like a shadow behind a curtain, and the longer you stare, the more it reveals. This is what makes it so potent in critical circles. Not its loudness, but its restraint. Not its twists, but the quiet devastation of its truth. From the moment the screen fades in and Mara Bell steps out of her car into the sunlight of her new, borrowed life, critics were already leaning forward. And not because something was about to happen, but because something already had. That's the genius of The Woman in the Yard. It doesn't unfold chronologically. It uncoils. Every scene feels like a layer being pulled back, revealing not plot points but psychological fractures. Critics like Wu at Sightlines Journal called it the rare film that uses horror not to build fear, but to excavate it. And the events that lead us through Mara's journey aren't explosions or screams, they're subtleties. A shadow that stands too still. A dream that feels like a memory. A back door that opens when no one's looking. These aren't throwaway scares. They're slow, precise chisels breaking down a wall Mara has spent years building. And every time something goes wrong, a light flickers, a gate creaks, a window fogs over, the viewer is pulled deeper into her emotional state. Take, for example, the first full appearance of The Woman in the Yard. She doesn't charge the frame. She doesn't whisper. She stands. And the camera doesn't zoom in. It holds. Wide, still, uncomfortably long. The effect, from a critical standpoint, is disarming. It forces the audience to interpret rather than react. Is she real? A projection? A ghost? A guilt-born hallucination? Critics like Devin Long at the Frame Weekly argued that this moment marked the film's true inciting incident, not because something happened, but because nothing did. And that nothing echoes. The events that follow, Mara's forgotten time, the bruises, the disappearing objects, function as emotional metaphors more than supernatural elements. As Dr. Green's voice messages continue, the viewer becomes caught in the dissonance between logic and lived experience. And it's in this space, critics say, that the film does its most effective work. And it's in this space, critics say, that the film does its most effective work. It invites you into the mind of a woman who has been gaslit not just by the world, but by her own memory. That tension, between reality and recollection, is the engine of the narrative. Critically, the second act's pacing is where opinions begin to divide. Some reviewers applauded the slow, meditative burn. Others found it too elliptical, too hesitant. But nearly all agreed, once Mara begins digging in the yard, something shifts. That moment, hands in the earth, dirt on her skin, uncovering a child's shoe and a fragment of a white dress, was called a visual scream by Indie Verge columnist Charla Dean. Because it doesn't confirm a murder. It doesn't tell you what happened. It tells you that she knew. And she buried it. The brilliance of the film lies in how it frames revelation. It never hands the audience clarity. It doesn't flash back. It doesn't explain. Even when Mara recalls the game, the laughter, the screams swallowed by the night, it's delivered not as exposition, but as sensation. The film trusts its audience to feel what happened, rather than understand it. And that, according to many critics, is what elevates it beyond the genre. The yard itself, as a setting and symbol, has been dissected endlessly in critical essays. It is not just the space outside the house, it's the emotional middle ground between forgetting and remembering. Inside, Mara pretends. Outside, she confronts. The yard is both her punishment and her passage. Professor Rina Abdulhadi, writing for the Atlantic Cinema series, called the yard a psychic borderland where the self is both spectator and subject. But perhaps no moment invites more analysis than Mara's final decision to open the back door. She doesn't open it because she's overcome with bravery. She doesn't open it because she's been told to. She opens it because she can't live behind it anymore. The door becomes the final line between denial and reckoning. And when she steps outside, into the very space that has haunted her since childhood, critics say she is not entering danger. She is entering truth. And then the woman appears, not across the yard this time, but behind her. Some critics have pointed out that this inversion of expectation, of placing the horror behind the protagonist rather than ahead, is a metaphor for memory itself. We don't see it coming. It comes from what we've already left behind. That final contact, when the woman places her hand on Mara's shoulder, has been read as everything from catharsis to judgment to absolution. The truth is, it's all three. And that's why it resonates. In that moment, the film doesn't punish Mara. It remembers with her. The woman is not a curse. She is consequence. And forgiveness doesn't come from fighting her. It comes from turning around and finally seeing her. The lack of a traditional ending, no death, no escape, no neat resolution, was polarizing. But it also cemented the film's place as one of the year's most deeply felt cinematic experiences. The closing image, of Mara seated in the yard as the wind moves through the grass, has been described by critics as hauntingly peaceful. Because the real terror isn't in being haunted. It's in not being believed. It's in forgetting the things that shaped us. And it's in knowing that somewhere, maybe just outside the window, they still wait to be remembered. The Woman in the Yard was never going to be a blockbuster in the conventional sense. It doesn't cater. It doesn't handhold. It doesn't wrap anything in a bow. But what it does, what it delivers, is a feeling that clings to your skin. And critics responded in kind. Rotten Tomatoes reported a 95% score after its festival debut. Reviewers used words like lyrical, meditative, unsettling. Kerry Washington's performance was universally praised as a career-defining moment. And director Lena Rowe was hailed as a master of atmospheric truth-telling. Audiences, too, carried the story forward. In hushed conversations, in online forums, in late-night texts that simply read, "Did you see her?" What critics agreed on most, regardless of whether they loved or merely respected the film, was its emotional resonance. Because beneath all the stillness, all the metaphor, all the dread, was a simple, devastating truth. You can lock the doors. You can close the curtains. You can tell yourself it never happened. But one day, you'll look out the window. And she'll be there. Not to hurt you, but to ask if you remember. The story of The Woman in the Yard didn't begin with a screenplay. It began with a house. A place that didn't just inspire a setting, it birthed a mood. Director Lena Rowe had driven past it by accident while scouting locations for a completely different film. It sat off a quiet road in North Carolina, nearly swallowed by overgrown hedges and trees that leaned a little too closely, as though they were listening. She got out of the car, walked the length of the cracked stone path, and stood before the weather-worn door with its flaking red paint. That was the moment she said the film attached itself to her. She hadn't written a word yet, but she'd already started remembering. From that instant on, The Woman in the Yard became a production unlike anything Rowe, or any of the crew, had experienced before. Every part of it felt slightly out of time. The days blurred. The set grew quieter. People whispered more often than they spoke. Some described the experience as reverent, like filming a ghost story inside the ghost itself. The production was relatively small, a 28-day shoot, mostly practical locations, no green screens, no elaborate special effects. It was designed to feel real, close, tangible. Lena insisted on natural lighting wherever possible. If the house was too dark, they lit it with table lamps, floor lights, or the glow of a phone screen. It had to feel lived in, she said, like we were interrupting someone else's memory. But capturing that feeling didn't come without its difficulties, or its oddities. One of the first major challenges was the weather. North Carolina in late summer is unpredictable, and the crew was working under an already tight schedule. There were only 2 exterior night shoots built into the plan, both crucial for scenes involving the woman in the yard. But both nights, unexpected fog rolled in, thick and impenetrable, forcing them to shut down. At first, Lena was frustrated. But then she had an idea. She had the crew stay and roll footage anyway. Cinematographer Jesse Takeda began capturing long, static shots of the yard cloaked in the dense fog. The footage was surreal. Light glinting through the mist, tree branches bending in slow motion, the grass moving in strange, swirling patterns. Much of this ended up in the final cut, repurposed as Mara's dream sequences. The production didn't plan the weather. But the weather, as Lena would say, knew the script. That theme of the film, knowing itself, ran through the entire shoot. Kerry Washington, who portrayed Mara Bell, spoke often of the strange coincidences she encountered while filming. In one scene, Mara finds an old photograph behind a mirror. The photo, aged, torn, and barely visible, was created by the props team using stock imagery and Photoshop. But when Kerry looked at it on camera for the first time, she froze. "I swear I'd seen that woman before," she said. "She looked like someone from my childhood. Someone I couldn't place, but knew." That take was used in the final cut. Inside, the rooms are small but open, allowing light to travel and disappear in strange ways. The kitchen is pale and square, filled with cabinets that don't quite close, and a window that stares into the overgrown backyard. There's a hallway that always seems longer than it should be. A staircase that creaks differently each time someone climbs it. A guest room Mara never uses. And always that sense that if you turned your head too fast, you'd see something just leaving the room. The backyard is the heart of the film. A patch of grass surrounded by old trees, with hedges so thick they may as well be walls. It feels private, but not safe. It's not expansive, but it stretches in ways the eye can't quite trace. The ground slopes slightly, imperceptibly, toward a corner that remains in shadow long after the rest of the yard has caught the sun. This is where the woman stands. And from the very first moment we see her, the yard changes. It breathes differently. It quiets the birds. It tilts the light. It tells us that something happened here and that time has decided to keep it. This isn't a haunted house story, it's a haunted space. And the haunting doesn't come from what you see. It comes from what you feel creeping just beyond the frame. Cinematographer Jesse Takeda shot the entire film using mostly natural light and vintage glass. The lenses used were imperfect, some slightly warped, some prone to flaring at odd angles. This wasn't a mistake. It was a method. She wanted the world to look like it had been remembered, not recorded. Scenes bleed at the edges. Light halos around objects. Faces blur just slightly when they turn. It gives the entire film the look of a memory you're trying to hold on to, and losing, frame by frame. Inside the house, the lighting is always indirect. Windows allow soft daylight to spill in, often filtered through curtains or reflected off mirrors. There are no overhead lights. Just lamps. Candles. The blue of a television screen. The flicker of a lighter. Night scenes are not brightened for visibility. They're allowed to be dark. Shadow swallows whole corners of rooms. There are moments when you'll squint at the screen, unsure whether you're seeing something or just imagining something. That's intentional. Because the woman in the yard doesn't want to show you the ghost. It wants to make you believe it's there. One of the film's most striking visual techniques is its use of space. Mara is often framed alone, even when she's not. She sits in the lower third of the screen, dwarfed by walls or framed between doorways. The negative space around her becomes a character of its own. Critics noticed early on that the film often leaves too much room in its compositions, too much empty frame. It makes you lean forward, makes you search. And just when you're sure there's nothing there, you see the slightest movement in the background. A flicker, a tilt, a presence. The editing, by Miles Brandt, enhances this unease with patience. Scenes linger longer than you expect. Cuts don't come at moments of tension, they come after. The camera doesn't flinch. It waits. When Mara turns away from a window, the frame doesn't follow her. It stays, focused on the yard. And you sit there, gripping the arms of your chair, waiting for the woman to appear. Sometimes she does. Sometimes she doesn't. But the dread is always there. Color is used sparingly but powerfully. The palette shifts as Mara descends into her memories. Early scenes are washed in warm, golden tones, sunlight on skin, beige walls, dusty light filtering through curtains. But as the story progresses, the colors desaturate. Blues become colder. Shadows deepen. Even the greens of the grass turn sickly. By the end of the film, the entire world feels drained, as though the house itself is tired of pretending. Sound, or the absence of it, is perhaps the film's most potent atmospheric weapon. There is no traditional score for much of the runtime. Instead, we hear creaks, distant dogs barking, the rustle of fabric, the hum of a refrigerator. And silence. Heavy, crawling silence. When music does appear, it's almost imperceptible, low, drawn-out notes, a piano that sounds like it's been underwater. Composer Ivy Lane didn't write themes. She wrote echoes. Sounds that feel like they're being remembered from a dream. One particularly eerie moment occurs halfway through the film, when Mara sits alone in her living room and begins to cry. There's no music. No sound cue. Just her breath and the faint ticking of a clock. But underneath it, so soft it's almost mist, there's a distant whisper. The kind that makes you pause the movie and rewind. You're not sure if it was part of the sound design or something else. That uncertainty is the point. The house is always whispering. Throughout the film, visual motifs recur. Mirrors, doorways, windows, reflections. Mara often sees things that aren't there, or are, but shouldn't be. Her reflection lags a second behind. A door she thought was closed is now ajar. The camera catches glimpses that she misses. But it never confirms. It never indulges. Even the furniture was chosen with intention. Every piece looks slightly off. Chairs too small, tables slightly tilted, lamps that flicker when no one is near them. These aren't props. They're extensions of the space. Objects that hold memory. That whisper when touched. In the backyard, the woman never moves on camera. She is static like a photograph. And yet, her presence shifts the very atmosphere. Scenes in which she appears are colder, even if the weather hasn't changed. The wind stops. The light flattens. Animals stop making noise. It's not about what she does. It's about what she changes. And the house changes too. Doors that were open in one scene are closed in the next. Hallways lengthen. Rooms appear darker than they should be. There's a sense that the house is editing itself, not just to hide something, but to protect something. Or someone. By the film's end, the setting has become as much a character as Mara herself. The yard is no longer just grass and trees. It's memory. It's grief. It's the moment something happened and no one spoke of it again. When Mara finally steps into it, barefoot, trembling, silent, it feels like a ritual. The ground doesn't just hold her steps. It accepts them. The final scene, shot in one long, unbroken take, captures everything the film has built toward. Mara stands in the yard, the sun low behind her. The camera slowly pulls back. No music. Just wind. Just light. Just the house watching. The woman doesn't appear. She doesn't need to. Because now, Mara remembers. And the yard lets go. And maybe that's what makes the film so quietly devastating. It doesn't trap its characters in a haunted house. It shows what happens when the house is haunted by them. By what they did. By what they didn't say. By what they left behind. The setting of The Woman in the Yard doesn't just support the story. It is the story. A place too quiet to forget, too still to forgive, and too alive to ever be empty. Some films are born in boardrooms, mapped out months in advance, every detail scheduled and rehearsed with surgical precision. But The Woman in the Yard didn't come from a plan. It came from a whisper, from a feeling. From the moment director Lena Rowe stood in front of an old weather-beaten house hidden behind a row of hedges and felt something watching her. That house changed everything. Even before the cameras rolled, cast and crew described the project as having a different kind of energy. Not ominous, necessarily. Just quiet, heavy. Like stepping into someone else's memory. The set wasn't loud or chaotic. It was still, introspective. And for most of the team, the experience would leave a mark long after the last frame was captured. Day one began as most film sets do. Trailers, cables, catering, the thrum of early morning logistics. But even in that bustle, there was something sacred about the house. The production design team, led by Emily Crane, had done very little to alter the interior. The wallpaper was original, the floorboards untouched. They added props, a few threadbare rugs, dusty picture frames, forgotten notebooks, but the structure was already telling its story. The rooms didn't need to be dressed. They needed to be respected. Lena set the tone early. No walkie-talkie chatter inside. No unnecessary noise. "Let the silence speak," she said. "We're filming in it." And silence did speak. One of the most talked-about rituals on set began almost accidentally. On the second day of filming, assistant director Elaine DeSoto noticed that Kerry Washington, who played Maribel, would walk slowly through the house before each take, alone, barefoot, her hand brushing the walls as she went. It wasn't blocking. It wasn't part of the scene. It was something she did to settle herself, to enter the space like it was real. Soon, others followed suit. Jesse Takeda, the cinematographer, began scouting shots in silence, whispering adjustments to her crew rather than shouting them. The gaffers dimmed their lights lower than standard just to match the mood. Even Isla Vey, the woman in the yard, rarely spoke while in costume. She would sit in the yard between takes, her white dress blending into the background, still and observant, like her character never left. "I think we all started living inside the film," said boom operator Dane Harlow. "And not just when we were working. It changed how we moved, how we listened, even how we slept." That immersion wasn't just emotional, it was logistical. The house had no central heating or air conditioning, and some rooms were off-limits due to structural weakness. The bathroom floor tilted slightly, and the attic groaned with the weight of every gust of wind. On particularly humid days, condensation would form inside windows, even when the temperature outside was cool. Once, while filming a kitchen scene, the condensation on the glass began to slide in long, symmetrical streaks, as if being drawn by invisible fingers. The crew paused. Someone joked that the house was trying to give notes. No one laughed too loudly. There were fun moments, too. Lightness amid the shadows. A now legendary prank occurred during the third week of filming, when one of the PAs dressed up in the woman's costume and stood in the background of a rehearsal without telling anyone. Lena spotted her through the monitor and nearly spilled her coffee. Kerry, always composed, broke into laughter so hard she had to redo her makeup. Afterward, the crew dubbed the prank Yardgate, and the culprit was rewarded with a custom T-shirt that read, "I scared the director and all I got was this veil." The bond between cast and crew was palpable. Kerry Washington, known for her intensity and professionalism, surprised everyone by organizing small rituals at the start of each week. Tea ceremonies, quote readings, quiet walks around the block. She encouraged everyone to bring something personal to the set each day. A song, a scent, a memory. "We're not just acting," she said. "We're remembering." Isla Vey, in contrast, stayed silent. It wasn't method acting. It was presence. She once said in an interview, "The woman in the yard isn't dead. She's memory given shape. She's what's left behind when someone forgets something too important." She carried that energy with her even off-camera, writing lines in the margins of old books, sketching symbols from the script on scraps of paper. She refused to be mic'd unless absolutely necessary. But for all the quiet, there were real challenges. Filming the yard scenes proved more difficult than expected. The house backed up to a wooded area, and while that added authenticity, it also meant bugs, mud, and unpredictable lighting. Jesse Takeda had to adjust exposures constantly, using makeshift shades and mirrors to redirect sunlight. In one key scene, the reflection of a boom mic showed in a window, requiring an entire reshoot at dusk, when light was fading and time was tight. That evening, the generator failed. The crew held their collective breath. But Lena didn't panic. She grabbed a flashlight and handed out tea lights. The scene was rewritten on the spot to be lit naturally. What resulted was one of the film's most striking sequences. Mara sitting in a room lit only by candles, whispering her sister's name. The performance, raw and trembling, was so powerful that it remained untouched in the final cut. Sound posed its own trials. The quiet nature of the house meant every floorboard, every creak, every distant truck became part of the soundscape. Ari Kinsey, the sound designer, insisted on rolling multiple takes just to capture authentic ambience. "Silence is never really silent," she said. "There's always something whispering under it." On one afternoon, while recording room tone in the guest bedroom, the microphone picked up a strange frequency, a low hum that rose and fell in a pattern. It wasn't electrical. It wasn't natural. It almost sounded like breathing. They kept the file. There were stranger moments still. Midway through production, a small framed photo kept falling off the wall in the hallway. It didn't matter how many times they secured it. Tape, nails, brackets, it fell. Always during takes. Always landing face down. Eventually, they gave up and wrote the fall into the scene. Lena's response? "The house wants us to tell it right." By the final week, the cast and crew weren't just ready to wrap, they were emotionally exhausted. Not because of the hours or the workload, but because of the atmosphere they'd lived in. The script, subtle as it was, had opened something. Stories were shared. Tears were shed. On more than one occasion, someone left the set without speaking, needing space. But when the final scene was shot, Mara in the yard, the sun dipping low, the wind gentle as a sigh, no one moved. The camera cut. Lena stood still, her eyes full. Carrie placed her hand on Isla's shoulder, the way the woman had done to her in the scene. There were no speeches. Just silence. And then applause. Slow. Quiet. Earned. The wrap party was subdued. A small fire pit. Blankets. Music played from someone's phone. They didn't watch dailies. They didn't talk awards. They talked moments. About how the house changed them. About how the film wasn't something they just made, it was something they lived. When asked later what she remembered most from the shoot, Kerry Washington didn't mention a specific scene or line. She said, "The way the house felt when you were the only one awake." And Isla? She smiled and said, "I don't think we were ever alone." The Woman in the Yard was a film made in stillness. Made in whispers. In the spaces between light and memory. But behind the curtain of shadows, there were people. Laughing, sweating, working. Telling a story that felt too familiar. Too quiet to ignore. It was a production that didn't just build a film. It built a memory. And some part of it, as they all say now, never really left that yard. Grief doesn't knock. It slips in through the cracks. Through an open window. Through the scent of a flower you forgot you loved. Through a familiar hallway, now too quiet. In The Woman in the Yard, grief isn't just an emotion. It's the weather. It's the sky above the house and the earth beneath the yard. It's the hum in the floorboards and the whisper that keeps returning long after the house has been locked. This is a film that doesn't shout its themes. It breathes them. And if you sit still long enough, you feel them breathe back. At its core, the film is about remembrance, not the sweet kind where photos are placed on mantels and stories are shared at dinner tables. It's about the memories we bury, the ones we lie about, the ones that leave their mark in the soil and show up years later, barefoot, veiled, and staring through the window. Mara Bell, the protagonist, isn't haunted by a ghost in the traditional sense. She's haunted by herself, by what she did, by what she didn't do, by what she's spent years trying not to see. The woman in the yard isn't an entity that intrudes on Mara's life, she's a reflection of it. A product of everything left unsaid, everything forgotten. And so the film becomes a meditation on the violence of silence. One of the first clues to this theme is found in the structure of the story. There are no flashbacks in the conventional sense. Instead, there are fractures, moments when time folds, when the present bleeds with something older, something unfinished. Mara doesn't discover her past. She remembers it, piece by piece. And the more she remembers, the closer the woman gets. This leads into the film's second powerful theme, guilt as inheritance. Mara isn't just confronting her own memory. She's confronting a lineage of denial. The house she rents isn't neutral ground. It's a container of history, of stories never told. And the yard isn't simply a place, it's a grave, of a moment, of a truth, of someone. We learn, slowly and without fanfare, that Mara once had a sister. Not through exposition, but through hints, a toy, a whispered name, a drawing buried in the floorboards. Naomi. She's never fully seen. But she is everywhere. And this is where the third theme takes root. The presence of absence. So much of the woman in the yard is defined by what isn't there. Conversations that trail off. Rooms that are too quiet. Photographs with missing faces. Naomi is the absence that shapes the shape of everything Mara has become. And the woman in the yard? She is that absence, finally asking to be acknowledged. Symbolism plays a quiet, almost subliminal role in how the film communicates its emotional terrain. Take the yard itself, a recurring visual and thematic symbol. It represents the liminal space between what is known and what is denied. Not quite inside, not quite out. Not the safety of the house, nor the chaos of the world. A threshold. A waiting room. That's where the woman always stands. She doesn't enter the house because the truth hasn't yet been welcomed in. She doesn't vanish because she hasn't yet been accepted. She waits. That stillness is the film's most powerful form of communication. It dares us to look longer, harder. To stop asking what she wants, and start asking what we've forgotten. Another striking symbol is the mirror. Mirrors appear often, above the bathroom sink, in the hallway, at the end of the staircase. But they never reflect what we expect. Sometimes Mara's reflection lags. Sometimes it's missing entirely. Sometimes it shows her sister's room, even when she's not standing in it. These aren't just visual tricks, they're symbols of disconnection. Of Mara being unable to face herself. Of a life split in half by trauma. The veil worn by the woman is yet another symbol layered in meaning. Veils are typically used in ceremonies, weddings, funerals, rituals. Here it becomes a barrier, a filter between Mara and the truth. She can see the woman, but not her face. She knows she's there, but not who she is. Only when Mara is ready to confront her past does the veil begin to lift, not literally, but emotionally. There's also the recurring use of thresholds in the film. Doors that remain slightly ajar. Windows left open. Mara often stands just inside or just outside, never fully crossing over. This physical behavior mirrors her internal state. She is always on the brink. of remembering, of breaking, of surrendering. It's not until the end, when she steps fully into the yard and says, "I'm ready," that she finally crosses that emotional threshold and allows herself to be seen. Color plays a deeply symbolic role as well. The film begins with warm tones, dusty ambers, faded golds, soft grays. As the story progresses, the palette cools. Blues deepen. Shadows lengthen. By the final act, everything is muted, desaturated, drained. It's as though the world itself is grieving. The color shift represents not only Mara's descent into memory, but the death of the version of herself that once believed forgetting was safety. Light, too, is used symbolically. Scenes with Mara alone are usually lit from behind, her face in shadow, the light outlining her like a ghost. When she dreams or remembers, the light shifts. It becomes direct, harsh, unforgiving. In these moments, the world is no longer cushioning her from the truth. It's showing it plainly. The more she remembers, the brighter these moments become, until, in the final scene, she is bathed in soft, natural light, facing the sun. It's not absolution, but it's acknowledgement. Critics and scholars have also pointed out the symbolic use of time. Clocks are seen but rarely heard. Time seems fluid in the house. Days pass without markers. The past and present blur. This distortion is not accidental. It reflects trauma's ability to fracture linearity. For Mara, time is not something that moves forward. It's something she circles, something she avoids, and the yard is the center of that circle. There are also motifs, quiet, recurring visual rhythms, that build the film's deeper meanings. One is breath. Mara is often shown exhaling slowly, holding her breath, or waking with a gasp. Breathing becomes a way of marking emotional shifts. When she's in control, she breathes easily. When the woman appears, her breath catches. The final scene is wordless, but filled with breath. Long, even, steady. She is not at peace, but she is no longer suffocating. Even objects carry symbolic weight. A child's shoe. A torn drawing. A teacup that always seems to be filled. These aren't props. They are anchors. Memory traps. Emotional landmines. They carry the weight of things not said, of events left out of journals, of screams that went unheard. But perhaps the most powerful theme, woven through every image, every whispered line, is the confrontation between the known and the unknown. And the idea that sometimes the thing we fear most isn't some external evil, but the part of ourselves we locked away, the part we made silent, and the part that, eventually, comes home. Mara's final act isn't heroic. She doesn't banish a ghost or solve a mystery. She doesn't scream or fight. She opens a door. She steps into the yard. She turns around. And she remembers. That's the emotional engine of the entire film. The journey from forgetting to remembering. From hiding to facing. From silence to acknowledgement. The woman in the yard doesn't hurt Mara. She sees her. And seeing in this world is more terrifying and more healing than any scream. It's also what makes the film linger. Because the woman in the yard isn't about what's waiting outside. It's about what we bring with us. It's about what we bury, and what never stops growing in the soil. Some stories are told with fire and thunder, bold camera swings, booming scores, and edits that crack like lightning. The woman in the yard takes a different path. It doesn't shout. It listens. It's a story that steps into your space softly, like a shadow stretching across the floor in the late afternoon. And the filmmaking techniques that shaped it were crafted with the same quiet intention. Every frame, every cut, every whisper of sound was designed not to command your attention, but to slip past your guard and settle somewhere deeper. From the very first scene, the film establishes its visual language, restrained, watchful, patient. Cinematographer Jesse Takeda didn't approach the film like a traditional horror story. Instead of wide-angle lenses that distorted or close-ups that screamed discomfort, she chose vintage glass, lenses that left the edges soft, that bloomed when struck by light, that made the world look like it was being remembered, not recorded. The house, which was already full of natural texture, peeling paint, warped wood, uneven lighting, wasn't overlit or smoothed out. It was filmed exactly as it was. Daylight poured in when it could. Shadows were left intact. In many interior scenes, you can see the dust in the air catching the light, drifting lazily like time itself. It gave the film a kind of stillness that felt lived in, haunted not by ghosts but by memory. And that stillness was part of the plan. Takeda operated much of the camera work herself. The decision to go handheld for key interior scenes added a subtle intimacy to the film. But this wasn't the shaky cam aesthetic of found footage horror. It was more like the camera was breathing, following Mara as though it didn't want to startle her. In scenes where she was alone, the camera lingered, often hovering just behind her shoulder or framed slightly off-center, allowing space in the frame where something might appear. That space, what wasn't shown, became one of the film's greatest tools. The use of negative space, especially in scenes where the woman in the yard is seen from afar, was a deliberate choice. The camera doesn't push in. It doesn't zoom. It holds, sometimes uncomfortably long. And the effect is unnerving, because you start to question whether the woman is actually there, or if your own eyes are filling in the blanks. It's a visual trick that turns the viewer into an accomplice, into a witness, and it draws you in with slow dread. Lighting played a crucial role in shaping the atmosphere. Takeda avoided hard light sources. Instead, she leaned on what she called motivated naturalism. If the light came from a lamp, it felt like that lamp belonged in the house. If it came from a window, it was the sun at the correct time of day. There were no artificial flares or moody blues to force the tone. Instead, the film moved from warm, sunlit palettes in the early scenes to cooler, desaturated tones as Mara's emotional state began to unravel. This shift was done so gradually that most audiences didn't consciously notice it. But they felt it. They felt the world become colder. They felt the softness fade. And that emotional response was intentional. The editing, helmed by Miles Brandt, was as much about rhythm as it was about pacing. Rather than following the traditional three-act structure with clear beats and escalations, Brandt edited the film as a kind of emotional wave. Scenes didn't always cut when expected. Conversations drifted. Moments lingered. The cuts weren't jarring. They were haunting. Often, a scene would end not with a line of dialogue but with a sound, or the closing of a door, or just the way Mara looked at something she didn't fully understand. Brandt referred to his style on this film as resonant editing, cutting not for plot, but for emotional residue. You'd feel a scene end, but it would leave something behind. A discomfort. A question. A ghost. And then there's the sound. The sound design in The Woman in the Yard is arguably its most powerful and unsettling technical achievement. Overseen by Ari Kinsey and her small obsessive team, the soundscape was built from scratch using field recordings taken directly from the house and its surrounding environment. Wind through the trees. Creaking floorboards. The hum of old electricity. These weren't added later. They were collected during overnight stays in the house, when no one else was around. Kinsey said she would leave mics rolling for hours in different corners of the property. The resulting audio tracks were layered beneath dialogue and ambient sounds, creating an almost imperceptible atmosphere of unease. In certain scenes, especially those where Mara feels watched, low-frequency rumbles were introduced, nearly inaudible, just enough to create tension. Sometimes, you don't hear anything unusual, but your body tightens anyway. It's primal. And it works. Music, or the absence of it, became a deliberate tool. Composer Ivy Lane didn't write traditional score. Instead, she created tonal textures, slow, mournful piano fragments, distant cello, reverb-heavy bells. Some of the musical cues were created by dragging metal across old wood, then processing the sound into drones that mimicked the human voice. In fact, one of the most chilling choices was the use of whispering. Not loud, clear whispers, but layered, barely there murmurs. They don't stand out. They slip under your awareness. But they're there. In scenes where Mara approaches the window. In the final act, when she walks into the yard. It's not what the whispers say that matters. It's that they're happening at all. One scene, in particular, encapsulates the synergy between visual and auditory technique. It's the moment Mara opens the door at night and steps into the yard alone. There is no music, no dialogue. The camera stays wide. The grass sways slightly. The house glows behind her. But the moment is carried entirely by sound. The rustle of fabric, the chirp of insects suddenly silenced, the wind dying in an instant. Then comes the breath. Not Mara's. Someone else's. Mara stops just a few feet from the edge of the porch, unwilling to cross into the yard itself. The two women stare at each other in silence. Or rather, Mara stares. The woman's face is still hidden, either by veil, shadow, or something stranger. But she feels seen. There's a pressure behind her eyes, a weight settling on her chest. A knowing. And then the woman vanishes. Not with a scream. Not with a flicker. Just gone. Mara stands there for a long time. Listening. Waiting. Trying to understand what part of her this figure belongs to. Because now it's clear, the woman isn't just a ghost. She's a wound. The next morning, Mara wakes with dirt under her fingernails. Her bed sheets are damp. Her shoes are by the door, but one is missing. She opens the back door slowly and finds muddy footprints across the kitchen floor. Too small to be hers. Too clean to be recent. She begins to spiral. Not in the cinematic way people imagine mental collapse, but in quiet, unsettling stumbles. She forgets what day it is. She finds her tea still steeping from the night before. She turns on the faucet and blood-colored water rushes out for half a second before running clear. When she blinks, she sees her reflection in windows where no glass remains. Dr. Green's voice messages become more concerned. "You need to come back," she says. "This is not the kind of solitude we talked about. This is something else." But Mara doesn't respond. She can't. Because now, her memories are starting to crack open. She remembers a night when she was young, running barefoot through the backyard, her sister close behind. Laughter. Then a sharp stop. A breath held. A scream swallowed. Something happened beneath the tree that no longer grows there. Something Mara was told not to remember. Something someone else was blamed for. She begins to dig. Literally. At night, with a flashlight and her bare hands, she starts pulling up earth near the back fence. There's a spot that feels wrong. Too flat, too quiet. And as she unearths the dirt, she finds pieces. A child's shoe. A doll's broken face. And beneath it all, a scrap of fabric. White. Torn at the hem. The same hem the woman in the yard wears. That night, the dreams change. They're clearer now. She sees her sister, young, bright-eyed, terrified, standing at the edge of the yard, pointing toward the trees. She mouths something over and over. Mara leans in. "You left me." And suddenly it all clicks. The woman in the yard isn't a stranger. She never was. She's a memory. A reckoning. A shape Mara pushed down so deep, it came back wearing the only form it could. Not a ghost. Not a demon. But a version of her sister, a version that remembers everything Mara tried to forget. The climax comes not with violence, but with surrender. Mara opens every door and every window in the house. She walks barefoot through every room. She calls her sister's name out loud for the first time in decades. And then, in the quietest moment of the film, she steps into the yard and says, "I'm ready." The woman appears, not across the lawn, but behind her. And this time, she moves. She reaches out, slow and deliberate, and touches Mara's shoulder. And with that touch, the yard changes. The grass wilts. The trees grow thin. The air thickens with grief long held. The world folds inward. And the truth floods in. Mara didn't just witness something. She was part of it. A game gone wrong. A fall. A scream. And a choice. To lie. To pretend it never happened. To let someone else take the blame. Her sister. Vanished. Her guilt. Buried. The woman in the yard was the part of her that remembered. In the final moments, Mara sits in the center of the yard, the grass flattened around her. She breathes slowly, deliberately. The camera pulls back. Not fast, not showy. Just steady. As if leaving her in the truth she's finally accepted. There's no jump scare. No cut to black. Just the sound of wind moving through the leaves. And a faint echo of laughter, once lost, now found. Mara Bell doesn't scream. She doesn't run down hallways clutching her chest or flip light switches on and off while panting into the darkness. She doesn't call friends for help. She doesn't even raise her voice. That's what makes her dangerous. That's what makes her real. Mara is not your typical horror protagonist, and The Woman in the Yard is not a story about bravery in the face of monsters. It's about confrontation with memory. And Mara, quiet and trembling and frayed at the edges, stands at the center of that reckoning like a woman carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She arrives in the story like fog, silently, slowly, and with something hidden in her wake. When we first meet her, she's stepping out of a car, eyes guarded, movements calculated, as if afraid to leave even a fingerprint on the world around her. There's a stillness to her that at first seems like composure. But it's not. It's grief. It's something buried so deep it has turned into posture. Her smile is soft and tired. Her voice never climbs. She is, as one neighbor puts it, the kind of person who vanishes without making a sound. That's the point. Mara is trying not to be seen. She chooses a house with no history, at least, none on paper. A place where the hedges are high and the windows are narrow. A place where the past can't find her. But we know it will. Because characters like Mara don't get to hide for long. As the film unfolds, what makes Mara so deeply compelling is not just what she does, it's what she refuses to do. She doesn't seek out the woman in the yard. She avoids her. She explains her away. She shrinks inward. Not because she's weak, but because she knows exactly what fear tastes like. This isn't her first encounter with dread. It's her return to it throughout the first half of the film. Her character becomes a portrait of internal collapse. Her days are structured. Tea at 9, walks at 11, reading by 2. Her routines aren't habits. They're anchors. Tools to hold her in place so she doesn't slip through the cracks of her own mind. But the cracks are already there. You can hear them in the way she speaks, how her voice trails off at the end of sentences, how she loses time, how she pauses in doorways like something on the other side might be different from when she left it. And yet, we never stop rooting for her. Kerry Washington's performance imbues Mara with this incredible duality, fragility and steel in the same breath. She doesn't beg for sympathy. She doesn't perform her pain. She just carries it. The way she looks out the kitchen window. The way she brushes dust from a table she hasn't used. The way her hand hovers over the phone when Dr. Green calls, not because she doesn't want help, but because she already knows what's coming. She knows the woman in the yard is not new. She's remembered her before. But it's not just Mara who makes this story breathe.